Dr. George from the Vinci Center in Cyprus. He has been renowned for his research, and he's going to talk about the very challenging issue of Candida today. Dr. George, if you want to start, please.
Yeah, and good evening, my end. We are going to cover some of the details of systemic candidiasis, otherwise known as Candida, because all of us as practitioners are encountering this in our everyday clinical practices. It's estimated that approximately 15 to 40% of the population in the Western world have systemic candidiasis from various clinicians that are experienced in diagnosing and treating Candida. From my own personal experience, I would comfortably say that approximately 30% of my patients have systemic candidiasis, probably because of the overuse and abuse of antibiotics and other drugs here in Cyprus. The pioneers who actually brought this to the public was Dr. Orion Truss, who wrote The Missing Diagnosis, and Dr. William Crook, who wrote The Yeast Connection. Some of you may be familiar with Dr. Crook's questionnaire that actually looks at the symptomatology of Candida, and it can be scored. So if a male gets in excess of 150 and a female 180, around there, then it's pretty certain that they have the Candida. It's truly an epidemic, and it confuses a lot of medical practitioners and other practitioners because there are so many symptoms associated with it. So few illnesses have sparked as much hostility between the medical community and the lay public as the chronic candidiasis syndrome. That was written probably 40 years ago, but it's still pertinent today. So let's have a look at what is Candida. Well, it's a fungus. It's a unicellular organism. We can see a micrograph here. It's normally present in the GI tract. They've actually found it in approximately 90% of infants. It reproduces asexually by budding. So here we can see a daughter cell being budded. And there are many, many species of Candida. Probably the most common one that we know of is the Candida albicans, but there are many others, such as Candida glabrata, cruzi, lusitanae, paracellosis, tropicalis, and so on and so forth. There's about 81 species of Candida in total. Now, Candida is usually I think we've mentioned this, that 90% of babies test positive for the normal budding Candida. The reason that we have Candida in the gut is when we die and the friendly bacteria die off with us, then there is a trigger whereby the normal budding Candida converts into a pathogenic mycelial form, and we'll look at this in a minute. This is a micrograph, electron micrograph of the Candida species, showing the cell wall, the plasma membrane, the mitochondria, the vacuole, the nucleus. So it's pretty much a normal cell. The thing that keeps the friendly Candida intact is our friendly bacteria, the acidophilus, the bifidobacteria that we have in our small and large intestine respectively. when there is an imbalance between the good and the bad bacteria, then this leads to a dysbiosis. And there are many factors that can lead to a dysbiosis. Achlorhydria or hypochlorhydria, for example, drugs that inhibit hydrochloric acid production in the stomach, such as the hydrogen proton inhibitors, pancreatic insufficiency, decreased bile output due to liver or gallbladder congestion and disease, decreased gut motility, as in cases of chronic constipation, a weak ileocecal valve. All of these can cause a dysbiosis, which can break down protein via the process of putrefaction to produce vasoactive amines, which cause constriction and relaxation of blood vessels. Permeability or leaky gut syndrome, it can cause abdominal pains, altered gut motility, and so forth. So the reason I've mentioned this is because when one is dealing with Candida, one doesn't just deal with the Candida overgrowth. One also has to address the GI tract as a whole, as well as, perhaps detoxifying the patient, looking at the constipation and some of the causes and helping with that, looking to see if there is digestive issues, bowel distension, stomach distension. Could this be caused by a deficiency of hydrochloric acid and pancreatic enzymes from the pancreas, and so on and so forth. So Candida can grow from the normal budding form into a pathogenic form. It's an interesting microorganism because it has one gene that controls two proteins. So when the gene is switched off, if you like, it's in the form, the morphology is in the form of the unicellular budding Candida, which is the normal Candida in everybody's gut. But when there's a trigger and the gene switches on, then we get this pleomorphic form of pathogenic mycelial form of Candida that you can see in the upper right hand picture. This filament-like roots invade deep into the mucosa, and they can go anywhere in the body. The mycelia release phospholipase, an enzyme that attacks the cell membranes of the mucosa, splitting the fatty acids, generating free radical activity, and causing inflammation in any membrane that they penetrate. Whenever the yeast colonize, they can cause symptoms from anything, a pruritus and itchiness in the anus, in the vagina. It can cause diarrhea, heartburn, sore throats, etc. These mycelial forms, the pathogenic forms, also are releasing 79 different toxic byproducts that damage specific tissues and organs and will determine which symptoms will occur. These toxins, mycotoxins, can also compete with hormone receptor sites, and they can cause endocrine imbalances such as hypothyroidism, hypoestrogenism, as well as binding cortisone, progesterone, and other hormones for its own use and causing other endocrine deficiency states. Dr. Patrick Quillen, a famous naturopath and nutritionist in the States, he says it's a true epidemic. Candidiasis is the most underdiagnosed medical condition in the USA. So, what is the role of Candida? Well, we've already mentioned one of the roles. After we die, Candida acts to decompose the body, feeding off the tissues, because It's secreting the phospholipase enzymes that will dissolve the tissues. If there is no immune system to keep it intact and fight with it, then it will do its job, and then we go back to the soil. The second function is that it will gobble up any putrefied food matter in our digestive system that may be there because of digestive issues. So, oops. So let me see if I can just close down this. If I can close down my. Okay, and let's go back. Okay, now we're back to where we were, and let's continue with the next. Whoops. Sorry about this. I don't know why it doesn't like the next slide. Let's see. No. So let's just do it like this. I think you can all still see it. Okay, so let's look at how do we actually get Candida. There are probably the most common reason is because of the overuse of antibiotics. Antibiotics do not only destroy the bad bacteria, they also destroy the good bacteria, the Acidophilus bifidobacteria, and as that reduces, that there is a cutoff point where as it reduces to a certain level, that is the trigger that kicks off the gene to trigger the pathogenic mycelial form of Candida. There are other drugs that can also eradicate friendly bacteria. There's a list there, such as the steroids, contraceptive drugs, other hormonal drugs, elevated cortisol from excess stress, tap water that contains chlorine and fluorine will kill off friendly bacteria. Other parasites and intestinal worms will kill off friendly bacteria. Diets that are high in sugar, with an acidic pH, and other refined products with an acidic pH. Constipation, drugs, alcohol, hypothyroidism, diabetes, heavy metals. So there are many trigger factors that can actually trigger the normal Candida to convert to the pathogenic mycelial form of Candida. Why is it a serious problem? Well, because the 79 mycotoxins, which are toxic products released by the Candida, are creating a tremendous stress on the immune system and on many other metabolic processes in the body. If we take just one of the yeast toxins as an example, the acetaldehyde, it's known to adversely affect red blood cell flexibility, making the cells abnormally rigid and thus impairing circulation and diminishing oxygen transport. And this is one of the mechanisms that can actually explain the mental systems, as well as the cold hands and the feet that are quite common. Mental symptoms are also precipitated by acetaldehydes binding to the amino groups of neurotransmitters. Acetaldehyde also interferes with acetyl coenzyme A function and metabolism of glucose, both inherent components of the energy production or the Krebs cycle. It's also known to interfere with both the absorption of vitamin B6 and the metabolism of beta-carotene, magnesium, protein. Yeast toxins also interfere with beta-6 desaturase enzyme pathways during the synthesis of prostaglandin hormones. So therefore, the prostaglandin series 1 and 3, which are the natural anti-inflammatory prostaglandins, will be interfered with, and this will increase the production of the series 2, leading to inflammatory conditions, leaky gut problems, etc. The yeast itself can also produce alcohol in the body from the fermentation of the carbohydrates. The yeast toxins can also injure the immune system. If we look at the first diagram, we can see the yeast and the intestinal lactobacillus bacteria in balance. This is normal immune function. A balance between the intestinal lactobacillus bacteria and the yeast allow for the normal immune lymphocyte function. The helper cells stimulate the B cells to make antibodies, whereas suppressor cells appropriately oppose the B cell antibody production. So here, antibody production is in balance. If we look at the second diagram, however, we can see here the overgrowth of the intestinal yeast release the toxins into the bloodstream and alter the immune function. The intestinal yeast overgrowth and the yeast toxins released into the bloodstream inhibit the suppressor cell function. There's a stimulation of antibody production by the helper cells, is now unopposed, and inappropriate antibody production occurs. So here we have a heightened state of allergy, as well as an increased susceptibility to autoimmune conditions. Here we have what is known as the Candida-related complex, where we have other health conditions that get involved in a whole syndrome. And with all of these conditions, whether it's chronic fatigue syndrome, or autoimmune issues, leaky gut syndromes, fibromyalgia, multiple chemical sensitivity syndrome, MS, hypothyroidism, endocrine disorders, emotionally related disorders, and so on and so forth, there is very likely a Candida issue related to this. Now, why is it dangerous? Well, generally speaking, it is not dangerous in a normal person, let's say, that has a functioning immune system. However, if a person is immune compromised, as we would see, for example, in HIV positive people and other immune compromised conditions, then it becomes a threat to life. And it is true that many people that are immune compromised, such as AIDS patients, do die of systemic candidiasis. Here we have an example of systemic candidiasis from a patient of mine. This is before treatment, and this is about halfway through treatment. This is actually an adult that had an underlying immune deficiency. So it was quite a difficult case because of that. Here we have another case of psoriasis, and this is before treatment, and this is after Candida treatment. And it's amazing that Candida can actually infiltrate in these rashes and live there quite happily, causing this sort of redness and this inflammation. Whereas when the Candida goes, the inflammation abates. This is an example of rectal cancer. This is Candida of the vulva. This is Candida of the cervix. This is Candida of the penis. Candida of the nails. Certainly, from my clinical experience, if patients have now fungus, then you can pretty much be certain that it's a very chronic condition. This is Candida in infants. This is another patient with Candida on the neck that had seen many different dermatologists, but when her Candida cleared, all this cleared. This is a patient that I only saw once. It was a young 6-year-old child with immune compromised condition called Olmsted syndrome. And because of the immune compromised condition, you can see here that the Candida is literally eating away the tissues. It's putrefying and eating away the tissues. This was a young boy that I only saw once, so I didn't have an opportunity of treating because they decided to go to the medical fraternity for treatment. This is Candida in the arm, but this is a mixed picture with a bacterial infestation as well. This is after the treatment, but because of the bacterial infestation, further treatments were required. So this gives you some example of where in the body Candida can penetrate. It can literally penetrate anywhere. It prefers moisture, mucous membranes. So it's commonly found in the mouth, the tongue, the throat. It can also live in the stomach, particularly if the pH of the hydrochloric acid is lower than normal. Then it can take a hold in the mucosa of the stomach and live there quite happily. So it really is akin to a rat, very prolific, penetrating everywhere and doing its damage. What are the signs and symptoms? Well, these can be divided into the gastrointestinal and the genitourinary tracts. So you get the characteristic indigestion, the bloating, the food intolerances, the gastritis, the colitis, the distension, flatulence, chronic heartburns, etc. It can be systemic, so it can be causing chronic fatigue, joint pain, stiffness, cold hands, feet, a sensitivity to alcohol, to yeast. Can cause sleep disturbances, numbness, tingling, itching, lots of dermatological problems. And then there's the mental emotional manifestations, which is because it does actually disturb neurotransmitter substances and also endocrine imbalances. So depression, irritability, brain fog, agitation, sort of a spacey feeling, inability to concentrate, memory loss, mood swings, anxiety, and more. And here are even more symptoms. I tried writing all the symptoms once, and when I got to 10 pages, I stopped because it was never ending. And these were from my own patients. So there are many symptoms. I've seen patients that I would never have guessed had an underlying Candida problem, but when the Candida cleared, the symptoms cleared as well. So there are many symptoms. Now, other problems of Candida because the rhizoids of the mycelial pathogenic Candida can dig deep and actually cause inflammation and damage the mucosa, you can get a lot of stimulation of antibodies by the helper cells, which are now unopposed, as we previously talked about, and more antibodies are produced. And this can result in an increased susceptibility to autoimmune conditions. And personally, I have never ever seen a patient with an autoimmune problem that doesn't have an underlying systemic candidiasis. I've yet to see one. This is a vaginal smear showing the mycelial candida penetrating the vaginal walls. Here's another one where we're actually seeing the penetrating the stomach lining, and you can see the hypha fully penetrating the tissues and producing phospholipase in the process, which then further digests the tissues, and on it goes. The next slide is candidiasis in the kidney. Here, this is a direct smear of urine from a patient with candidiasis of the kidney, showing the Candida albicans in the mycelial or tissue phase, with the blastoconidia budding from the pseudohypha, the little grape-like bunches. Are there gender differences? Well, women are more likely to get Candida overgrowth than men. It's in a ratio of about 60% women to 20% men, 20% children. The reason for the gender differences is that progesterone increases the amount of glycogen, which is easily converted to sugar in the vaginal tissues, which provide an ideal growth medium for Candida. Progesterone levels also elevate during pregnancy, which Candida like. So usually the outbreaks during pregnancy are greater. And this is a very difficult situation because one does not treat systemic candidiasis in pregnant women. The die-off reactions, the mycotoxins released, the inflammation released is not going to be healthy for the developing baby. So how do we know that we've got it? Well, there are some tests that can be done. The Candida-specific intestinal secretory IgA, for example. These are antibodies responsible for defending against the yeast, attaching to the intestinal walls. But then again, a negative test result does not rule out a Candida-related condition. And there are many false negatives in these tests, so they're far from accurate. It's more an indicator. The Candida antigen titer test demonstrates if yeast antigens or toxins are present in the bloodstream and in what concentrations. The higher the blood concentration of the antigen, the worse your symptoms and state of health are likely to be, but then again, this is not a very accurate test. Then you have Candida antibodies, immune complexes. This is another test that measures the amount of antibodies, such as the IgA, the IgE, the IgG, the IgM, that your immune system will generate to fight the yeasts. And the higher the antibody count, the more likely you have Candida. Again, these tests are not very accurate, and I think it would be true to say that there is no very accurate clinical test at this moment in time to determine Candida. For those that have got themselves into bioresonance testing using bioresonance diagnostics, whereby one takes an ampule of a pathogenic Candida and tests to see if there is a resonant effect with the patient, then if the patient does have pathogenic mycelial form of Candida, then there will be a resonant effect, and this will be shown on the testing instrument, on the bioresonance diagnostics. Again, this is not extremely accurate, but it's a relatively easy test that any nutritionist and naturopath and other health practitioner can actually run in a clinical environment to determine. And then one can look at the symptomatology. So Dr. Crook's Candida questionnaire is also a good tool to fathom the degree of Candida. There are some patients that literally have all the symptoms on this questionnaire and score way, you know, up in the 250s, 280s, etc., which is an incredibly high score, meaning that they have all the symptoms. Okay, now I think we've said enough about Candida, what it is, what is its function, how do we get it, how do we measure it, etc. But I think the important thing is to look at the Candida treatment protocol. This is now called the Candida. This is now called the Da Vinci Candida treatment protocol because it's been used at the Da Vinci Center for many years now. This is one of the papers that I initially published in the Biological Medicine journal Explore back in November 2005, and this was another publication in the British Naturopathic Journal in 2008. So I guess I've been treating Candida for a good sort of 15 years or so, and I have seen thousands of patients and treated successfully approximately, well over 5,000 patients to date. I'll go through the Da Vinci treatment protocol step by step, so you understand not only the basic principles and the concept, but also the details behind it, because it's the detail that is important. So the first, there are 5 basic objectives in the treatment of Candida, and you've probably heard them before. First, you have to starve the Candida by eliminating all the foods that feed it. This is extremely important because Candida does explode exponentially if you feed it. For example, one cell will become 100 million cells in 4 days, because in 24 hours, one cell becomes 100 cells. In another 24 hours, 100 times 100, 100 times 100 times 100, and so on and so forth. 3 days, it's 1 million. 4 days, it's 100 million. So it's impossible to try and treat the systemic candidiasis in any way or form if you're feeding it. So this is critical. And the foods that you need to avoid is anything that contains sugar, and there are many foods that contain hidden sugars. They also must be avoided. All the fruit juices, the sugars in syrups, etc., everything. You know, usually what I say to my patients is, if it tastes sweet, spit it out. Anything that contains yeast. This is not only the breads, but anything that is fermented with yeast, including vinegar and anything that contains vinegar, such as ketchups, mayonnaise, pickles, and so on and so forth. The fresh fruit, we have to cut out for the first 6 weeks to allow the amount of the pathogenic Candida to die off. Usually by 6 weeks we've killed a substantial amount. If we add the fruit from the beginning, the fructose will just keep on feeding the pathogenic Candida, and this will not lead to success. So patients really have to get quite religious about this. Vegetable juices in moderation are okay. Dried fruits are out for the full 3-month protocol. This is a 3 calendar month protocol. No mushrooms of any type, including the medicinal mushrooms, shiitake, mitake, etc. No refined foods at all. So all the white flours, the white rice, the white pastas, I usually add cocaine and heroin to my patients to make them smile. These also have to be eliminated. No fermented products. We've already mentioned the vinegars and the alcohol products because they're fermented with yeast as well. Nuts are okay, but they need to be in their shells. You need to crack them because any shelled nuts will be exposed to fungal spores in the atmosphere, and that will aggravate the candida. So they can have shelled nuts that they crack themselves, whether they're Brazil nuts or walnuts or almonds, etc. The second phase of the treatment is to kill off the candida through the use of natural anti-candida products. Now, the products that I am going to discuss are not necessarily written in stone. There are other products that can be used, but what I've tried to do over the years is refine these products, and I will go through some of the reasons why I have chosen these. And also, we must bear in mind the cost to the patient. If we can use 5 remedies instead of 10, the patient will appreciate us because they will be paying less. So the remedies for the Da Vinci Candida treatment protocol that I've been using over the years for more than a decade, and I have been experimenting, but I would say that I wouldn't want to change this now because this actually works. Here we can see the main protocol, and as you can see, there's only 5 remedies there. The first one is called Candidaplex. I will come back to that in the next slide, and I'll discuss more details because it is a formulation. It's an American formulation by VRP, Vitamin Research Products in the States. The second product, which again I will talk about this in more detail in the next slides, is a herb from New Zealand called Horopito, or Pseudowintera colorata, and you can see there are 2 of these taken per day, morning and dinner. The Candidaplex is 222 with meals. I often recommend that no liquids are drunk with meals because we'd be diluting gastric juices, so that's why I always say with meals as opposed to with water. So as they chew their food, literally they pop the pill and swallow with the food, so it's digested with the food without the liquids in the stomach. The Acidophilus and Bifidus, and I'll talk about the specific one I use because I have experimented quite a lot with that. The Candida 30C is a homeopathic, and it's 2 little pilules dissolved in the mouth a little bit before meals, just under the tongue. And caprylic acid, which is around about 700 milligrams per capsule, and that's 3 a day. Now, if we look at the compound Candidaplex, the Candidaplex contains the biotin, which has been shown to prevent the yeast from converting into a pathogenic or fungal form. It actually interferes with that growth process. The calcium undecylinate, the undecinoic acid, has the ability to alter the composition of the fatty acids in the cell membranes of the Candida, leading to an inability to sustain its fungal form. So again, it sort of destroys that mycelial form. The pau d'arco, which is a herb, this is the bark extract, contains several compounds such as lapicol, xylodine, various naphtha quinones, but the most important is the lapicol. which has been shown to inhibit the growth of Candida. And in trials, they have actually shown that it has the same efficacy as amphotericin beta, which is a very powerful antifungal drug. The N-lyse, it's a trademark for all this enzyme blend, because the actual Candida has a biofilm, as other microbes would have, which is composed of a protein polypeptide, a polysaccharide, carbohydrates, fibrinogen, fibrin, polynucleotides that contain RNA, DNA materials. And this is bound together with ligands that have a very sticky property. These enzymes will destroy that biofilm. So it will prevent the Candida from sticking and penetrating deeper into the mucosa. The berberine is a herb. It's an extract from berberine sulfate. It's an extract from hydrastis or golden seal or grapefruit, etc. There are various herbs that contain berberine. And this has exhibited a broad spectrum antibiotic activity. So not only against fungi, but also bacteria and protozoa, and it also upregulates immunity. So if there's a mixed bunch of microbes in the gut, the berberine will also be clearing out a lot of the other microbes apart from the fungus itself. The sorbic acid will inhibit fungi as well as molds, and molds are often found together with the fungi. When I do bioresonance testing, I often find Aspergillus niger, I find mucorrhizmosis, mucido, and other molds in the same patient. And lastly, the trans resveratrol, which is from the Japanese knotweed. It's a root extract herb. This inhibits the yeast to hypermorphogenic transition of Candida albicans. So it is preventing the normal Candida from converting into this pleomorphic pathogenic form. So this is the reason why I use the Candidaplex. And the other herb that I use, which is an extremely powerful herb, this goes back to the 80s when scientists at the University of Canterbury in New Zealand discovered an extract from the Horopito plant, Pseudowinter colorata. It contains polygodiol, which has been found to be more effective at killing Candida albicans than the powerful pharmaceutical anti-Candida drug amphotericin beta. So there was a professor back in 1982, Professor Walker from New Zealand University of Canterbury, that isolated a sesquiterpene dialdehyde called polygodiol in the leaves of the Horopito, and that was really the active component. And if we look at the graph here, we can see polygodiol, which has a larger zone inhibiting the growth of Candida albicans, and the zone is formed within 1 day. This means that polygodiol has stronger and faster antifungal action than amphotericin beta. And this is all written up in journals, peer-reviewed journals such as Planta Medica. So I won't go on about that because time is flying. So let's move on to the next slide. This is the third phase of treatment, where we have to regulate the dysbiosis and convert the pathological mycelial form of Candida back to the normal form by the use of the isopathic Sanim remedies. Now, this was a real key, because many years ago I was also diagnosed with systemic candidiasis. I had all the symptoms, and I did spend a number of years traveling around the world seeing authors of books on Candida and they were placing me on anti-candida diets, etc. And I was feeling quite good on the anti-candida diet along with the various supplements. But as soon as that was finished, whether it's 3 months or more, then the symptoms would come back again. And it took me a long time and a lot of education to understand what was going on here. And it wasn't until I also studied homeopathy and homotoxicology and live blood analysis and Enderlein's theory and more that I began to understand that this is a pathological mycelial form of Candida that we're trying to eradicate. If we do a 3-month protocol and we leave, say, 5% of the pathological mycelial form, then of course, as soon as we change our dietary habits and maybe we add some sugars and refined carbohydrates into our diet, we'll be feeding the pathological form, and then it will start spreading. And because it does proliferate exponentially, then of course it doesn't take very long, probably 2 months, and the symptoms are back again. So the key to converting the pathological mycelial forms is the use of these Sanim remedies. The Sanim remedies was a product that was first developed back in the Second World War, in 1944, in fact. It was taken over by a large manufacturing unit in Germany, Sanim Kelbeck, and now it's widely recognized to positively influence the regulatory processes, the internal milieu, the immune response capacity, and the symbiotic bacterial ecology within the body, as well as being able to convert the pathological mycelial forms of Candida back to the normal forms. So at the end of a 3-month protocol, the Da Vinci treatment protocol I'm talking about, when we do the final test at the end of the 3 calendar months, there is no resonance with any pathological mycelial forms of Candida. And this is because of this key factor, the Sanim remedies. So I'm not going to go into detail because this is a very large topic discussing the isopathic remedies individually, but I can just simply say that the albicans and capsules contain Candida albicans in a 4x potency. There are also suppositories of albicansan that can be used for vaginal or anal candidiasis. The Fortical is Penicillium roqueforte, homeopathic at 4x potency. The Mucokel is mucorrhesmosis. The Nigasan is Aspergillus niger. The Notocal is the Penicillium chrysogenum. All at homeopathic potencies, and the Pefrical is the Candida parapsilosis. So these do not only knock out the Candida albicans, or rather convert the Candida albicans back to the pathogenic form back to the normal form, it will also work on other molds such as the mucorrhesmosis, the Aspergillus niger, and other forms of Candida as well. Because they clash with each other, we cannot take them together, so we give the patients this sort of table where they're taking literally one thing in the morning, one thing in the evening, one thing in the morning, one thing in the evening, and they just follow this around. And it's extremely easy to take these. If you look on my website, naturaltherapycenter.com, you will see the full protocol, and this year I had another peer-reviewed paper published in a journal of biological medicine that Sanim runs. It was in German and in English as well, and that paper is there for downloading for those that are interested. So the next thing we need to do is populate the gut with the friendly bacteria. And I have tried a number of probiotics, but the one that I really have seen a lot of physiological changes in many patients, including myself, is this wonderful formulation by Custom Probiotics. And believe me, I do not sell these myself. It's just that when I find something, I do get excited about it if it really does work. And this is an American company called Custom Probiotics. That's all they do. They just produce probiotics, very high quality. This is a high count multi-strain Acidophilus and Bifidus probiotic. It's got 60 billion CFUs per capsule at the time of expiration. So when it's actually manufactured, it has somewhere around about 98 billion per capsule. But a year later, at the time of expiration, they guarantee 60 billion. It's resistant to stomach acids. It has a slow die-off with temperature, and it contains all the important Acidophilus, the Lactobacillus, and the Bifidolactis and the Bifidum. So this is the one I use. They take 3 of these capsules per day, which is equivalent to around about 200 billion live bacteria per day. And it's very cost effective as well, far cheaper than other products that I found on the market. And as we said, this is important for the patient. Then we have to restore the biochemical balance to the body, strengthen the immune system to allow the body once again to regain and maintain control over the Candida overgrowth. And there are various other things that I do personally. I will test them for food intolerances, and we would avoid the food intolerances because it's the biggest source of internal inflammation. We would also follow a metabolic type diet, which will be very specific for their own metabolic type. In addition, I kick them off on a 2-week alkali detoxification diet with fruit and vegetables. Here we're not actually beginning to kill off the Candida, we're just cleaning the body of toxins, of inflammatory chemicals, bringing the pH of the body tissues back to some sort of normality. They can also combine in the first 2 weeks a liver and a gallbladder cleanse. We can also give them some herbs for a parasite cleanse. So we're preparing the milieu, the internal milieu. We will check out the digestion. If necessary, give HCl and pancreatin. We can give some herbs for constipation if that's present, and it's very critical to do that. We can check thyroid temperatures and help strengthen the thyroid in various ways. We can run a tissue hair mineral analysis and look at what deficiencies they may have, and also heavy metal loads. We use the HMD, heavy metal detox. You'll find that on detoxmetals.com, and there's a lot of literature on it. It's again undergone double-blind placebo-controlled trials and definitely works for eliminating heavy metals. We use drainage remedies, homotoxicology drainage remedies, because this is very important to open up the drainage, the liver, the kidneys, the lymphatic system, to help the elimination of the toxins that are being released during this detoxification protocol. We've already talked about the foods, we cut those out. We've already talked about the remedies. We can also add a multivitamin, we can add a fatty acid, an omega-3, 6, 9, and so on. We've talked about that one as well. Now, we have to be aware of Hertzheimer reactions, and everybody is familiar with these. Sometimes they can be quite violent, particularly during the initial stages. But normally, from my clinical experience, they don't last longer than 24 hours. And there are many of them, and obviously the client has to be drinking plenty of water to be flushing a lot of these mycotoxins that are being released into the system. Why do treatments fail? Because they're not using the correct antifungal therapy, the whole protocol, that is. They may be lacking hydrochloric acid, pancreatic enzymes, they may have thyroid dysfunctions, they may have other colon dysfunctions. It's very difficult to eliminate candida if they're chronically constipated, if they have tons of parasites, or if the patient is not eating correctly. So the yeast syndrome, as I call it, or the systemic candidiasis, is a true epidemic, but there is hope. And even though many of the clients that I see from around the world have been extremely frustrated in their attempt to treat their candida, and they usually do it in completely wrong ways for many reasons, and now hopefully you will understand some of those reasons. Certainly I can confidently reassure the patient that if they follow this protocol, they have a lot of hope in recovering. Thank you for listening. I think we're just about on time. We've spent an hour. We could have spent, of course, another 3 hours expounding on some of the details. But I think you have a broad picture here of the Da Vinci Candida treatment protocol. And for all those that are interested in reading more of the science, there are some peer-reviewed papers that I've written that you can download from these websites. The last website, the worldwidehealthcenter.net, is still being built. It should be ready by the end of the year, and it will contain the whole package of products and a lot more information on the Candida protocol and many other of the protocols that we implement at the Da Vinci Holistic Health Center. Well, good night from me, and again, thank you for listening.
Thank you, Dr. George. That was really very thorough, very informative. I have to admit there were a few things that I've never heard before, so it was really good. Do you have maybe a few more minutes to answer some questions? We do have some questions. Brilliant. So first question is about some of the remedies that you have recommended. How we get access to these, and where can we find them? Of course, we have a lot of different members here been in different countries, so that might be quite challenging.
That's the $10 million question that I keep on hearing from many practitioners that read the protocol, Maria, and this is why, you know, this worldwidehealthcenter.net website is being set up. So it will be a one-stop shop for all of these products that are important for implementing the Da Vinci Candida protocol. Alternatively, I've already mentioned some of the manufacturers, but of course it does mean that, you know, one has to order these from different manufacturers unless one can find a one-stop shop.
So there is not really
because I order in bulk, because, you know, we have a lot of patients going through these protocols on a monthly basis. You know, I order directly from the manufacturers most of the time. So the answer is, you know, there will be a one-stop shop unless you can find another one-stop shop to find the products.
Yeah, okay. So not an easy answer there. Then I have a couple of questions about the testing. One, if there is any test that you can do for Candida-associated mycotoxins.
To determine the mycotoxins?
Yes, if there is any test that you can actually
Oh yes, there are. There are. I mean, toxicologists, have spectrometers that can measure mycotoxins. But the expense of measuring the 79 mycotoxins produced by the Candida would run into thousands of dollars. Thousands. They're very expensive tests because they're very specialized tests.
Yes. And I guess this is because are pretty accurate. But again, on testing, you mentioned a few ways to test, including the questionnaire, but you said that none of them is reliable. Now you also mentioned the mycotoxins, very expensive tests. What do you have to say about stool tests, the last generation CDSA testing, which is supposed to be quite accurate on Candida as well? What is your view on these?
Yes, they can be used. Of course, they are expensive. So, you're adding to the expense of the client. Personally, I use bioresonance testing, and I also train practitioners, including nutritionists, on the use of bioresonance. We have 5-day intensive courses here in Cyprus every 3 months. And on the college, naturalmedicine.com, there is a course, Energy Medicine and Bioresonance, so they can, cover all the theory there, and then, book in for a 5-day clinical training. And then once they buy their bioresonance device, they can have that in clinic, and they can then test the client, for a very small fee. And it's as accurate as I've ever found. Of course, one has to go through the process of learning the bioresonance testing. And this is the vegetative reflex testing. It's not an automated process. It's, taking, the individual ampules. In this case, it would be the pathogenic Candida ampule, to see if there's a resonant effect with the client. This is the test that I use along with the symptomatology of the client. And
so, sorry if I interrupt.
Yes.
But on testing, there's a kind of continuation maybe. I just received another one. What about the organic acid testing? So it's pretty much the same thing, quite expensive. And
yes, I mean, there are tests that, are indicators, Maria, but they are expensive, I mean,
right, for sure,
I use them, under special circumstances, but you can't, say to or at least I can't say to a client, when they walk in, look, we've got this test, but it costs 350 euros.
Yeah, it's about the same cost here in the UK. So
and then we have to then wait for the results, etc. I mean, a lot of the clients that come to me, they pretty much know that they've got Candida because they've been searching. They look at all the symptoms. They know what they're suffering from. And sometimes we need to look at the patient, listen to the patient, take a detailed history. Use some of these questionnaires. The Crook questionnaire is a very good one because it has literally all the symptoms or a lot of the symptoms of Candida. If they score high on that, it's a very good indicator that they have systemic candidiasis. I just check it out with the bioresonance testing to be absolutely certain. And in all honesty, those clients that go through the Anti-Candida Protocol, the health benefits that they get on many different levels is quite a wow factor, and they will tell you so.
I can imagine, yeah, for sure. A couple more questions, if that's okay with you, Dr. George. 2 questions really are on the treatment again, on the treatment protocol. If there are patients that also have SIBO, so that's bacterial overgrowth, small intestine bacterial overgrowth, would you also suggest a similar probiotic or this type of probiotic to them?
Yes,
yes.
I know that a lot of the SIBO literature now is saying, don't use the probiotics, the acidophilus, etc., because it could aggravate the situation, etc. I think the key to dealing with that is to look at the other factors that I talked about. So, for example, one has to look at the parasites that may be present. One has to look at, the lack of hydrochloric acid, the pancreatic enzymes, the whole GI tract as a whole in a holistic model. One doesn't just treat Candida in the same way as one doesn't just treat SIBO. One has to look at SIBO and Candida within the picture, the whole holistic picture of the client that you have in front of you. And I have had, hundreds of SIBO patients that have gone through this Candida protocol successfully using the probiotics that I have mentioned, and they've had no problem. But, we have prepared the milieu, they have gone through alkali detoxification diets, they have done liver gallbladder cleanses, they have, eliminated, parasites. We have fixed hypochlorhydria, pancreatic enzyme deficiencies, and so on and so forth, and more, and thyroid dysfunctions, and so it's a true sort of naturopathic model or holistic model of health. Within that holistic model, then I have no hesitation in giving acidophilus, to a SIBO patient.
Yes, thank you very much for that. I think that is actually very useful in any form of protocols that we may use as nutritional therapists as well. Sometimes you do need to have this holistic, integrative approach, especially when you're dealing with something chronic and challenging. So it's safe, I guess, to say that everyone is different, but as long as you have an integrative, holistic approach, then of course, and you listen to your patient, of course, there shouldn't be any problems using such a probiotic with SIBO.
Yeah, our learning curve never ends, Maria. We have to learn every day, and every client that we see is a new challenge. It's also an opportunity to open a book, do some further research, understand what's happening, and as you start connecting the dots and begin to see this holistic model, and then you work systematically offloading underlying causative factors, because of course there are underlying causative factors for SIBO as well. And
sure.
There are underlying causative factors for autoimmune diseases. One needs to start offloading those, and then you'll see that a lot of these symptoms and syndromes will just melt away into the background, and the patient feels well.
Right, thank you so much. Since you mentioned research, I think I have to mention this question, and then if there are maybe a few more questions left, because we're quite over the 1 hour now, I will just send them to you, Dr. George, by email, if that's okay, and you'll get me the answers to share with everyone. Is that okay with you? Because I think we might get some more.
Well, to be honest, I have 100 emails a day, and I don't really have the time to be answering, complex questions that require, half an hour per email. I'm just being realistic and pragmatic here. I think, we need to start, looking at some of the answers in the articles that I've written in there's a lot of information there. Of course, if there are, very, very specific questions, then, we can see about answering those.
Yeah, I think there is one. I'm just going to mention it because you mentioned the research that we need to be, always aware and always searching. And it's something quite new from what I understand. It's about the KIB 500. If you heard of that, and if you know of any benefits assisting with dying of Candida. Apparently it has to do with OSCN ions. I don't know if there's something that you heard or...
No, I don't know this treatment. You know, I know the treatment that I've just discussed within this holistic protocol, and I can guarantee that this works because I've seen it with my own eyes, and my middle name is Thomas. So you know, there are. If you do a Google search, you'll come up with hundreds of treatments that purport to treat systemic candidiasis. But in all honesty, many of the clients that I see from around the world, you know, they've tried many of those and failed for various reasons. But if a practitioner has found something that is simpler than this protocol, then they can communicate with me and share that. But I will also be asking questions.
Mm. Yes, so that was a question actually from Susie. So Susie, you can use Dr. George's email if you have actually used that treatment for yourself or your patients and you think it has been helpful. You know, you let us know if it works.
See, many of these treatments that I've read about, and I have seen many of them, yes, they may be effective at killing off the pathological candida, but they will not convert the pathological candida back to the normal candida.
Yes.
And that's really the missing link. I remember I did a lecture to practitioners in Brighton a few years ago, and you know, when I finished the lecture, there were 30 practitioners around me saying, now we understand why we have so many failures and patients come back after a few months, you know, with the symptoms again, because we're not using that key product to change the pleomorphic forms back to the normal forms of candida. Because when you finish the protocol, you cannot have even 1% of the pathological candida, because once you start feeding it, it's going to proliferate again.
Yes, I think we all know that. But what about the, this is the Sanim remedies you were talking about?
Correct.
Yes. And again, we can't get them, there is not somewhere that we can get them from, or I mean, how someone, a practitioner practicing in UK, or...
Well, I think, I mean, you can contact Sanim Kelbeck directly in Germany.
Okay.
Just contact them and say, you know, I'm a practitioner and I'm interested in this. You know, they know my protocol. So if you say, I'm interested in these, you know, that Dr. Georgiou uses, then, you know, I'm sure that they will set up a practitioner account and they can buy them from there.
Okay. That's great. I think we need to close now. I can see that we still kept most of our attendees, which actually proves how very interesting and very informative, very useful was everything that you just said. I would just like to thank you, Dr. George, for just sharing all these wonderful things with us. And I would just like to thank you, everyone, for sticking with us for over an hour through that presentation and then questions and answers. There's going to be a recording, and I'm going to send that to everyone who have registered after the meeting. So thank you very much, and have a good evening, or depending on where you are, just have a good day. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.
And I also thank everybody for listening.
Thank you, Dr. George.
All right. Good night.
Bye.